What do the deep staters who comprise the invisible government behind the visible government of the United States have in common with totalitarian Nazis? A lot more than you might think. Let's take a look. This is Beyond the Cover with your host, Gary Benoit, and today we have with us Daniel Natal. Daniel, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Gary. Good to be here.
Thank you, Dan. Now, of course, Daniel, you are very well known to our regular viewers already because you do the very popular Daniel Natal Show. But very recently, you wrote a cover story article in the September 26th issue of the New American Magazine entitled Deep State Nazi Hidden Axis. And the article says that there is a very strong connection between Nazis and the deep state. Not just during World War II, or maybe I should say in the post-World War II era, but right up to the present day. I imagine that sounds preposterous to most people, but your article is actually very convincing. So can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, well, I mean, this goes back to right at the end of World War II, as World War II was wrapping up, and there was something called the Galen Org, and it was run by a Nazi, and he basically had a syndicate of spies all throughout Eastern Europe. And when the war was wrapping up, he made a deal with the Allies for their, for his network, so that they could be incorporated into the CIA. And so right from the very beginning of the creation of the CIA in 1947, I mean, they were tied with a lot of these, former Nazis, current and former Nazis, that helped them create the CIA itself, based on the Gestapo. Harry Truman said that, very famously after the assassination of Kennedy. He said, "I would have never signed off on the CIA in 1947 had I known it would turn into an American Gestapo." And that sounds figurative, but there were actually literal Nazis helping them create, kind of the infrastructure and the logistics, and that was one of the things. And so there was a book that I ran across in the 80s, from the 1980s, and it was called Blowback. And it was about how these organizations that still had kind of neo-Nazi brigades in the Ukraine and all throughout Eastern Europe, that go back to the Galen Org, from the 1944-45, and so yeah, I mean, this has been there's been the continuous use of these movements. If you think about it, I mean, it's very similar to what they would do later with the Mujahideen in Afghanistan, where they used Islam, but it was kind of a throwback version of Islam that was a much more conservative version. And then you look at what they did in the West, and it was basically it was a mutant version of conservatism, but it was like a throwback kind of retrograde. And in this case, it was, the Nazis, wouldn't it be wonderful if we went back to the Nazis, as opposed to the Afghanistan people, who were kind of radicalized along the same lines. So it was a very similar template. Just one used Islam and one used kind of Christianity, Euro Christianity, these nostalgia movements, and to very good effect. And unfortunately, they misled a lot of people and used them as pawns. So
of course, there's a lot more than nostalgia involved. If you look at Ukraine, for instance, and you did mention Ukraine and Nazi brigades there, but you see symbolism of Nazism in Ukraine today.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. You're right. Like with the Wolfsangel and stuff, and the runic symbols that the SS used, are being recycled. But yeah, I mean, that it's just coming to the attention now. There's a recrudescence of this. But I mean, this has been in continuity. I mean, these syndicates have been used, I mean, for quite a while. And you look at the FBI and what they're doing in the United States as well, where they're trying to recruit people and kind of radicalize people. And you realize that a lot of this stuff is created by the intelligence agencies themselves, whether it's the FBI domestically, whether it's the CIA internationally. So a lot of this stuff is very inorganic, and so people, should be on their guard whenever they see somebody saying, "Hey, wouldn't it be a great idea to kidnap a governor?" And the person is like, a Fed, obviously. But I mean, they've been doing this technique in Eastern Europe too. So a lot of
Sure.
this stuff is very, very inorganic. But the youthful people are unaware of the history. They might get seduced into this and be used as pawns, as I said. So it's horrible.
Well, again, regarding Ukraine, the presence of neo-Nazism there, it's really quite out in the open. The media is not talking about it right now, but certainly in the past, the establishment has acknowledged that presence. But of course, that's something that the war makers do not want to talk about today, because that obviously will get in the way of the propaganda of the Ukrainian regime being all good and Putin being all bad, and certainly the Putin regime is despicable. But do you think we're benefiting the cause of freedom by supporting Ukraine over Russia?
Yeah, I mean, none of this, obviously makes sense, but that's one of the marketing ploys of, Western nation states now, like at the time of, when the church ruled things for 1500 years, we fought in the name of Christianity.
Mm-hmm.
And once that was lost as the nation state rose up, now we had to fight in the name of something, and it became democracy. Like in World War One, the war to end all wars, the war for democracy, and you see that recycled marketing, and it doesn't make any sense because the Ukraine is an extremely authoritarian state where all the
Right.
political parties are banned, everybody who's against Zelensky is arrested, and this was well before the war started.
Oh,
I mean,
exactly. And of course, to acknowledge that is not in any way to say that Putin is a good guy, but so often what we see, not only today, but when we look at history, is a huge gap, a huge difference between the rulers and their subjects or their citizens.
yeah, exactly.
And it's not a contradiction to recognize that rulers may be bad, while at the same time, the people are oppressed. You can support the people and not support the rulers.
Kind of like in our own country, where you can
Exactly.
love America but be at odds with the government.
Right,
And this is
which goes
true all
back
around the
to our
world.
topic, which is this axis, this deep state Nazi axis.
Yeah. Well, in the article, I kind of go back to where this all started, and it was basically with World War One. Just to get back to that,
Right.
the war to end all wars and the fight for democracy. That template, started. And so Germany had these war reparations placed on them, these
Mm-hmm.
oppressive war reparations that they had no hope of being able to pay back. The British, the French, the Italians, even like all these different groups were stealing their land. I think 15% of their land mass had been shaved off. They were taking all their intellectual property and patents. Like for instance, aspirin. The Bayer Corporation invented aspirin. The British took the patent for that, and all these pharmaceuticals. And I mean, they really got pillaged. And so they were in smoking ruins and rubble. They had no chance to pay it back. So then a guy named Hjalmar Schacht, who was a banker and who would later go on to be like a Nazi finance minister, but in World War One, prior to World War Two, he basically said, let's create this organization called the Bank for International Settlements, and it'll administer these German war reparations, but help us get money to pay these reparations. So his idea was putting central banks in all of the developing world, in every third world country, as we would call them now, emerging economies. And he said, let's manipulate their kind of, economies and get them to buy German goods and German industrial equipment. And through that mechanism, we can, pay back the reparations. And the problem was that once the Germans ended up paying off those reparations, the Bank for International Settlements just kept collecting the money. And so a lot of the stuff that we've seen all throughout the 20th century was rooted back to this syndicate, this financial syndicate, for all this unaccountable money. There's a great book called The Tower of Basel, because it's in Basel, Switzerland, and they talk about how the Bank for International Settlements is above the law. They can't be arrested. They're not taxed. They're not subject to taxation. The people who work there, they have diplomatic immunity. So the Swiss government even has legislation saying that they're basically immune from all Swiss law and all international law. So when you have endless money and no accountability, you start getting a lot of really bad things happening, radiating from that syndicate. So yeah, I mean, you see, and that began with the Nazis, Marschall,
Sure.
and so now we're, a lot of the stuff that began there has been, kind of taken over by the West, and
Yeah, and of course, it's not
or
just a lack of accountability, and it's not just having plenty of money, but it's also the acquisition of political power because the Bank for International Settlements, which is very much connected to the Nazis, is part of the international architecture that has been put in place since World War II and is part of the developing New World Order, the world government to be.
Yeah, and they even coined that term, the New World Order. That was done by Walter Funk, who was Hjalmar Schacht's successor. So he put together this economic plan for what the world would look like afterwards, and he described an EU with Germany as its economic engine in the center. He described global fiat currencies. Like a lot of the stuff that that they laid out as this New World Order that would take place after World War II was in fact put together, and it was its praises were sung by John Maynard Keynes, the British economist. He said, that if you took out the name Germany and put in England, this would be a wonderful plan. And they basically just kept most of Walter Funk's, New World Order architecture. One of the things, and this gets back to how these syndicates, the architecture, as you put it, was co-opted from Germany and exported to Britain and exported to the United States in terms of intelligence agencies like the Gestapo, and they remade them, using literal Nazis with Project Paperclip in Western countries, becoming intelligence agencies. And one of the point men, right from the ground zero of the creation of the Bank for International Settlements, was Allen Dulles. And so Allen Dulles just became like a fixer. He would go around, with his law firm, and he was connected to every coup imaginable, from the coup in Guatemala with Arbenz to British Petroleum in Iran in 1953, all these deposing of countries. And so when he tried to do the Bay of Pigs and Kennedy fired him, Allen Dulles, who in his own mind, he outranked Kennedy. He outranked, and he had diplomatic immunity. He was, working at the behest of the Bank for International Settlements. And so it was just interesting that after Kennedy was assassinated, that they put Allen Dulles in charge of the investigation.
Yeah, of course, Allen Dulles is one of the key deep staters of his day.
Yeah.
Now
he's the nexus to all
right.
of the stuff. It's really phenomenal.
Now I know on the surface, it seems odd that you would have people who would come from capitalist countries, including people who really benefited, the super rich, people with all kinds of resources. On the surface, you would expect those people to be anti-Nazi or anti-communist, and yet in the world of realpolitik, they work together. Why are they working together, and what is their ultimate goal?
Yeah, because these groups don't really have an ideology, right? They don't have a coherent ideology. It just changes. Just like how they'll use the radical left with utopianism about the future, progress, right? Progressives. They always think their utopia is in the future. Or they'll use neo-Nazis and jihadis whose utopia is in the past. Let's go back to this golden age, when everything was better and everything is degraded now. But so they use this pincer movement, this methodology of left, right, but they guide it, cybernetically. The cybernetics is systems theory where you use feedback loops, positive and negative feedbacks. And so they'll use neo-Nazi social justice warrior, neo-Nazi social justice, or they'll use communist Nazi. It doesn't matter to them because they don't actually have a coherent. It's just power. It's just naked power.
Exactly.
Like you said, realpolitik, right? That's Bismarck,
Right.
And so I mean that's what it gets down to. So people kind of miss the mark when they think that these people believe in capitalism. They don't,
Right.
or that they believe in communism. They don't.
Well,
or that they believe in
socialism, if you want to call it that, or they believe in monopolistic capitalism, but
they believe in
terms
control.
of their true beliefs, though, they're much closer to the communists and the Nazis than they are to people like ourselves who believe in free enterprise capitalism.
Yeah, well, I mean, exactly. They're authoritarian. We could label them as authoritarian, and they'll use any authoritarian ideology that they can find, whether on the left or on the right, but it doesn't matter. They don't care. Look at Zelensky, who himself he's Jewish, and he has no problem using Nazis in his in his country. I mean, it's phenomenal. These people do not have convictions. They're just
Well, of course,
straight
when
up
you refer to him as
unethical.
Jewish, that's only in terms of his ethnic background, because in
Yeah.
terms of being somebody who believes in the Jewish religion, obviously by his actions, he rejects that. And maybe another example we could cite, let's take Catholicism, for example. Would you say that Nancy Pelosi is being a good Catholic by supporting abortion?
Or Joe Biden.
Or is she being a Catholic in name only? That's right. Joe Biden is another example. So, regardless of a person's background, Jewish or Catholic or Protestant or whatever, when somebody becomes part of this cabal, when somebody becomes part of this conspiracy for global control, he is no longer a Jew or a Catholic or a Protestant in terms of a believer of that religion. He is instead somebody who has become anti-God and anti-man.
Yeah, just like I said earlier with the usage of Islam, with this
Right.
version of Islam that they radicalized people with. So, like I said, they don't believe in any actual ideology. They don't have any convictions. It's just power and advantageous, initiatives, like utilitarian belief systems rather than ethical belief systems. And it is, quite unfortunate that, we're still watching things that happened 100 years ago. We're still watching the same rhetoric. We're still watching the same, kind of techniques. And sadly, I mean, to a great extent, with large swaths of our population, it works. You have people waving their Ukrainian flags. You have people who are in Eastern Europe becoming Nazis. Or whatever. And it's good that we're doing this reporting. Just to kind of shed a light on the origins of these things, just so that people can kind of get a balanced view of history and get a sense of perspective and proportion. So,
well, that's really important, but I think it's also important to recognize that history is not something that just happens automatically or naturally. History is made by people. And regarding that, my final question, what hope do you have for the future? Do you think we can expose and stop this conspiracy for global control?
I think, the John Birch Society is an example. Probably pushed it back several decades. Even somebody as, like you'd think it would be inconsequential. Trump was just there for 4 years, but clearly they panicked. That even Trump, who was the most mild, conciliatory, like he really, he could have done a lot more had he, understood where the levers of power actually were. But nevertheless, even that pushed them back several years. So when people organize, I mean, it does make a difference. I mean, you look at a lot of the COVID rollbacks that are happening now, like the most hardcore, true believing zealots, and when people rise in the street, that actually has an effect. I do have hope, and these things do come in cycles. We lose our freedom, we get it back. We lose our freedom, we get it back. We lose our freedom. And we've been bereft of freedom for the last couple cycles. So I do see, kind of light at the end of the tunnel, going forward. But yeah, it could be bumpy, until we get there. But, don't lose faith. And, everybody out there watching this, listening to these words, we will prevail, because good always does prevail in the end. I do believe that. So I'll shut up now.
Well, we appreciate it, and actually we'd love for you to talk a lot more, but we got to be mindful of the time, though. So thank you so much.
Thanks,
appreciate
Gary.
your appearance on the program, and of course we encourage all our viewers to go to the New American Magazine and to read your cover story article about the deep state Nazi axis in the September 26th issue. Thank you, Dean.
Thanks.
If you like what you're hearing on my show, consider watching The Daniel Natal Show. Presented by The New American, The Daniel Natal Show presents analysis of news and current events. Think of it as the Intelligence Agency Bureau for the people, where listeners are invited to get their briefing. Check it out on thenewamerican.com/video.